Professor Miller. Professor Miller, it's your chance to make an opening statement with more props.
Can't live without him. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed Dr. Berlinski's statement, because he focused in on one of the major deficiencies of the four people on the other side of the table who argue against evolution. And that major theoretical deficiency is they have no explanation for natural history. And to me, as an experimental biologist, I am frustrated if I do not see a theoretical framework into which the past can be explained. We know something about the past, and there are facts about the fossil record, and I'll tell you in a very general way one of those facts, and that is that fossils show a succession of types over time. Now, we know the other side advocates intelligent design as a primary characteristic of the fossil record. Let's explore the primary scientific characteristic of intelligent design when it is squared with the fossil record. The fossil record, and I can give you specific examples, is characterized best by sequences of appearances and disappearances. Now, think what that means. What that means is that the characteristic that best describes the intelligent designer who would have designed this fossil record is incompetence. Because everything the intelligent designer designed, with about 1% exceptions, has immediately become extinct. Intelligent design has no explanation for the successive character of the fossil record. Evolution has a perfect explanation, and that is the appearance of new forms and the extinction of others. And if you see a scheme for the natural history of intelligent design presented by the other side tonight, you should treasure it, because they've never announced one before.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Don't go away. Mr. Berlinski.
Ken, in my introductory remarks, I showed a picture of Haeckel's embryos, those little drawings of embryos looking the same and gradually turning into different forms.
Indeed you did, and I'm going to give you a hand, because the picture that you have right here, I have brought an enlarged copy for just to help you out.
Okay, thanks very much.
Anything I can do.
And you notice that it says in Science magazine of a couple months ago, Haeckel's embryos, fraud rediscovered.
Absolutely.
And which it says, not only did Haeckel add or omit features, Richardson and his colleagues report, but he also fudged the scale. And the author of the report says it looks like it's turning out to be one of the most famous fakes in biology. Now, in your very good biology textbook for high school, it reproduces Haeckel's drawings, and it uses them in the section of how we know evolution occurred, and it points to them as saying that embryos should be preserved in the early stages. Now, my question
Embryos should be preserved in the early stages?
Well, embryos conserved in the early stages.
Okay, I think we should all be preserved in our early stages.
My question is this. You know, you were victimized by Haeckel's fraud, as
Indeed.
did everybody else. But do you think your publisher should notify school districts to have them tell teachers to point this mistake or this fraudulent activity out to students?
Oh, absolutely, and I would do better than that. First of all, the letters to my publisher changing these figures are already off. And secondly, what I have done for the textbook, and I appreciate the commercial for this, and I'd be glad to give the URL for those of you who are interested, is Joe Levine and I, my co-author, have set up an internet website in which we keep scientific updates to our textbook. And this is something which will go up in the website in a matter of days as a scientific update. I think it's very significant, and I appreciate your support on this.
That's great. I just have one more question, if I could squeeze it in.
Maybe we'll get back to you, Mr. Berlinski.
I'm sorry.
Professor
Mine
Johnson.
is next. In my discussion with Eugenie, we talked about the mechanism as the all-important thing, and the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism as to produce all this genetic information.
Indeed.
What is the most powerful demonstration, in your opinion, that the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection has this great creative power?
Well, I would give you, you asked me for the most powerful one, and I will give you two. The first one that I will give you are the repeated observations of random mutation and natural selection, as you like to call them in your own terms, producing new species. And I can give you several examples of new species that have emerged within human observation. The best example that I can give you is a butterfly, a genus of butterfly known as Hedylipta. Hedylipta is a genus of butterfly that feeds on various plants. It's endemic to the Hawaiian Islands, which means it's only found there. And there turn out to be 2 species of Hedylepta with mouth parts that only allow them to feed on bananas. Now, why is that significant? It is significant because bananas are not native to the Hawaiian Islands. They were introduced about 1,000 years ago by the Polynesians. We know this from the written records of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And what that means is that by mutation and natural selection, these 2 species have emerged on the Hawaiian Islands within the last 1,000 years. And I think that's a very good case in point. And I'll give you another one if you would indulge me, but I figure you only asked for one. Want another?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, here's another. In the November 7th or November 14th issue of Science magazine, a number of investigators wanted to test the Darwinian hypothesis that you folks say is never tested. And the way in which they did this was to take the receptor protein for the human growth hormone. It's a receptor to which the human growth hormone fits in precisely, and they did it a terrible genetic disservice. They mutated, they cut out an essential amino acid right in the middle of the receptor called tryptophan. With that gone, just like that mousetrap, it wouldn't have been expected to work. They then allowed a natural selection process to take place to see whether the cells, under their own observation, could mutate the receptor gene sufficiently to bind the receptor. And after 7 generations, lo and behold, there it was. And it illustrates beautifully the ability of natural selection to respond to mutations in proteins to co-evolve.
Mr. B.
I'd like to ask a different question. I do not find that result impressive, but we can talk about that later.
When you say you don't find it impressive, that's what Richard Dawkins calls the argument from personal incredulity.
But you realize
which is my evidence. My evidence against evolution is that I don't believe it.
Well, it's because of course, what it has to do. It has to create this immense amount of genetic information, much
Indeed,
more
sir.
complex than any,
Philip,
and
you're
without,
right.
without recording it in the fossil record.
Right.
That's
And you know
why
what,
it's not
Phil?
impressive.
I just gave you 2 examples, and that's still not enough.
May I ask
because they're
another
not
question
impressive.
related to Haeckel's embryos?
Oh, absolutely.
You not only showed these embryos in your book, but like other people, you said that things should be that way. You said in your book, mutations that affect early stage of development are likely to be lethal or deadly, and that mutations that cause less drastic changes would occur at later stages.
Again,
You're
likely.
not alone in this. Bruce Alberts, who wrote Molecular Biology of the Cell, says much the same thing. Now we know that is not the case, and that early embryos can in fact change. Because you and Bruce Alberts, the president of the National Academy of Sciences...
Is there a question?
Yes, here it is. Because you two did not, because you thought Darwinism would produce this result, which is now shown to be fraudulent, is it safe to say that no scientist in the world understands how Darwinism could affect embryology?
Oh, absolutely not. May I answer even though we're out of time?
Very briefly.
Okay, very brief answer is, you read a quote and you pretended it meant something else. The quote that you read was, mutations in the early stage are less likely to survive, not impossible, and then you pretended to say that it meant that they couldn't survive. The fact that something is less likely, the fact that something is less likely, the fact that something, I'm answering, the fact that something is less likely does not rule it out. I agree with that, Alberts would agree with that, and I think everyone in the audience would agree with it too.
Professor
Thank
Miller.
you.